So 12 months ago, I came to Coffs to hear about CDS, and probably like you guys, it was the first time I'd been to Coffs. Probably like you guys, you're a bit surprised you didn't get told anything, or we got told we couldn't know because there was no decisions. And then on the 8th of May, on a Sunday, lo and behold, there was a press release, and we suddenly knew lots about what was happening with CDS. So here we are, 52 weeks later, and New South Wales is fully on the path. In 52 weeks, we've exhibited draft regulations, we're doing MRF protocols, we've had more working group discussions and drafts to consider, and we're on the path to start in New South Wales on 1 December. We're really lucky today because we've also got, and I guess this demonstrates how the sector works, we've actually got representation as well from Queensland and ACT because they're also on the path. And it's really important when you cross boundaries and borders that you actually know what's happening as an industry and as an individual. So I'll introduce the panel today to you, and we'll get underway. So we've got Jeff Robson from DHP. So Tony, you might want to talk to him about levies later, not to set him up. Sorry. We've got David Singh from Regroup. Hey, what's a levy? That's right, what's a levy in Queensland? Anne Prince from Anne Prince Consulting. We've got Michael Trushall, I said that right? Trushall, sorry, I didn't have a lot to drink last night, from ACT. We've got Cameron McKenzie from The Hills, and we've got David Clancy from Cleanaway. So we've got a little bit of a different approach to last year because we're actually on the journey and underway. We've done panel. All right, so why container refund scheme? Well, we talked a lot yesterday about its genuine product stewardship, and it's something that, is a great example of product stewardship. The first presentation today, people didn't see that, but I think that really crystallised even more for me why we need to do it. We've got 3.5 billion eligible containers in New South Wales at present. So that's single-use containers. There's so many reasons why we shouldn't have these things, but we've got them. There's with a deposit of 10 cents that's been announced in New South Wales, which will also be in Queensland and ACT. That's $350 million that we didn't previously have in this sector that we're going to have, with potentially another $350 million in the handling and transportation fee. So this time last year, we didn't have this scheme. Now we've potentially got $700 million coming into our sector by the 1st of December. So it's a really big number. New South Wales EPA, whilst they might not always like what we do and say, they've really got to be congratulated for taking the lead on this. They're the first in Australia to actually push this ahead, whether we like the scheme or not, and the structure, and we all could have done it differently or better. They responded really, really well to a tight time frame. COAG sat on it for a number of years, ended up walking away from it, going too hard, not enough value, but New South Wales is on the path. Queensland and ACT are going to follow, so that's good news. We've got targets at the moment. 80% recovery from litter from containers is a target, and 80% recovery of the containers is the goal at this stage, and I think is going to go on the scheme coordinator, and 40% reduction in litter is the targets. And again, after watching that marine presentation, there's so many reasons why that needs to happen. Oops, sorry. So where are we? We've got 30 weeks to go. It's a bit scary for those of us involved, and some of us feel like we've lived and breathed this for the last few years. So yeah, we're on the path. New South Wales has created 7 zones throughout New South Wales, in which we're going to have, so for those of you who are not as intimate as some of us, and we're going to talk a lot of jargon, we've got 7 zones that have been set up throughout New South Wales, which I understand mirror the waste regions. We're going to have network operators appointed to all of those zones. So, sorry, New South Wales EPA aren't here today because they're in the middle of the tender process. Originally, when we set this panel up, we thought the tender would be finished, but it's been moved to 1st December. So we can't talk about the tender, all right? So we're going to talk more about structures and schemes today. So currently they're assessing the network operator applications. It's a competitive process. From memory, there was 8 groups shortlisted, and they're underway. So we don't know who that network operator is going to be, or the scheme coordinator. We're told that the scheme coordinator will be appointed in June, and the network operators in July. That's less than 30 weeks away. So we're about sort of 4 to 8 weeks away from knowing who will have these roles, and the 1 December is not moving. So, there's a bit of pressure. There'll be 3 operators appointed, up to 3 operators in Zone 7. That's the Metropolitan. That's going to have 85% of the containers. They have to have, on day 1, so 1 December, 85% of their collection points open. So bearing in mind we're in May, we're not knowing until June and July who's being appointed, and we've got to have about 250 sites operational in metropolitan Sydney. So that's Wollongong to Newcastle roughly. So I don't know how you've gone finding sites and getting approvals and those sort of timeframes can be a bit tight. So day one, you've got to have 85% if you're lucky as a network operator up and running, and there's financial penalties if you don't have 100% up and running in January, 8 weeks later. So it's a busy and challenging scheme. Just an idea of timing and where we're at, so where the other states are going, so you can see. And what I'm going to do now with that is a bit of a scene setting, and I'm going to hand over, and I'll probably put Queensland and ACT a bit at the back. I'm going to go through and ask the panel, starting with Anne Prince. We're going to talk about, so Anne's going to talk for a bit about data in New South Wales. David Singh is going to talk a little bit about MRFs and what that means for him, the 3 key issues. Then we're going to do Dave Clancy as a collector, Cameron as a council, and then I think there's an opportunity then for Queensland ACT to talk about what they've learned from New South Wales and how they're going with their schemes in their respective states. Yeah? Let's go. So Anne, everyone knows Anne. I'm not going to introduce Anne. All right, Anne, here you go.
Okay. Good morning, everyone, and it's lovely to see so many faces after such a good night. So first of all, I just want to congratulate the New South Wales Government. You all will know that I've been banging on about Aboriginal communities for a long time, and this is the single best policy that will help clean up Aboriginal communities across New South Wales and hopefully across Australia. And I'd also like to say that this is the single best policy that will enable a price to be put on a commodity or an item which, for west of the Divide, recycling has always struggled because the freight cost sucks up the commodity value and there's no money left over. So for all the struggling Western New South Wales councils, west of the Divide, things are about to change. So we were engaged by the New South Wales EPA to collect a whole range of data on what is in the current yellow bin, the red bin, in the litter bin, in stormwater pits, at train stations, at airports, in cafes, in restaurants, and the list goes on. So I'm just going to give you a snapshot of some numbers to sort of help set the scene. We also did it in winter and summer because with beverage containers it varies because of the seasonal and climatic impacts. Overall in New South Wales we've audited 1,600 households. We sorted the bins into 8 materials, 7 sizes and 51 products. So I know what you had last Christmas. In terms of litter bins, we found that there are 10 eligible beverage containers per 100 litres in a litter bin. In stormwater pits, it's actually 20 eligible containers per 100 litres of a stormwater pit. In terms of Sydney households, on average, there's about 13 eligible containers per household per week in a yellow bin. So that's $1.30 a week or $67 a year of value that is in your yellow top bins. We also went bush to Bourke, and we went 100 kilometres to the back of Bourke, and there is something 100 k's to the back of Bourke. And what we found there is Sydney, 13 containers per bin. The back of Bourke, 55 containers per bin. $286 worth of value per household in the back of Bourke. 4 times the Sydney average. In litter bins, in rural New South Wales, 3 times more, 30 containers per litter bin compared to 10 in Sydney. So this will radically change what happens in the whole of the state. The number of eligible containers will be about 80% of all containers will be covered. So going back to Sydney, we estimate there's going to be about 20 million containers per household per week that are generated. About 34 million containers per week are consumed at home, or 1.8 billion containers per year at home. So the majority of that, in terms of material, is glass, PET, aluminium and HDP. And there's a challenge to start with in terms of glass. In Queensland, we've also done audits from Cairns to Cooktown to Brisbane, Townsville, Charters Towns, Rockhampton. I've been everywhere, man. 1,200 households across Queensland, about 350 litter bins and about 35 stormwater pits. And the story there is quite different. Where we had 13 containers per household per week in Sydney, it's 14 in Queensland in the yellow bin, but there's 10 eligible containers per week per household in the red litter bin. So the consumption in Queensland of beverage containers, because of the climate and the heat, is much, much greater, but they're not as good at recycling as what New South Wales are. Sorry, Jack. In terms of litter, there were six containers per 100 litres of litter compared to 10 in New South Wales. 35 containers per 100 litres in a stormwater pit in Queensland compared to the 20 in New South Wales. So the data that we've got is reasonably reliable and robust. It's a snapshot, it's a sample, but it gives you a scale of what we're talking about.
Do you want to talk about glass? No, okay. All right. I will introduce David Singh because we've worked hard to get some new people to conferences here. So I will tell you a little bit about David because he doesn't come out as often as some others. I mean that in the nicest possible way. Don't know why you're laughing. So David's an industry veteran with over 15 years' experience in waste recycling industry in Australia, the UK and Asia. He was integrally involved in the development of the UR3R process, along with the overall development and financing of the Eastern Creek UR3R in Sydney, the largest AWT facility in the Southern Hemisphere. Subsequently, he led Global Renewables' successful bid and implement of the Lancashire Waste PFI contract with a processing capacity of 600,000 tonnes per annum contract. In 2009, David became owner, director and CEO of Global Renewables Australia. In 2013, he co-founded the Regroup. He has a background in mechanical engineering and holds a Bachelor of Engineering MBA, a graduate diploma in finance, in addition to leading Regroup. David is the chair of Global Renewables, sits on the boards of RDT, and he's also president again of ACOR. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Gail. So Gail's asked me to talk a little bit today from a MRF operator's point of view. So I'll share some of the discussions we've been having as MRF operators around ACOR. When we talk about MRF operators, we're talking about AWT operators as well as traditional MRFs. So I think the key thing for us to remember is that the CDS was not designed to, or CRS was not designed to fix recycling, but to reduce litter. And I think there's something a little more for us all to learn from this. Steve Beaman said yesterday, the amount of containers that the CDS in New South Wales is targeting is 160 million. And as Anne said, we're talking about of a total of 3.5 billion containers. So we're talking about a scheme to deal with 4% of the beverage containers. So it's a tiny part of the waste stream. If you take the numbers that Gail just talked about, we're talking about a cost, so assume all the deposits are returned, we're talking about a cost of $350 million. My rough calculation, that's about $2 a container. So a lot of discussion yesterday. Councils have very, very low levels of funding. The cost to move to organic systems are very expensive. The cost to implement technology is very expensive. When you zoom in and sort of say, well, we're dealing with 4% of containers at $2 a container, there's potentially a different way we could tackle a lot of these issues. So anyway, so as Ian said, we've got, we'll quote Ian Woolf, it's a world-leading recycling scheme. So as a MRF owner, so look at a P&L for a MRF owner, there are two key revenue streams, product sales and gate fee. MRFs are quite unique because a big part of the revenue is generated from product sales. If you're looking at a landfill, it's gate fee. If you're looking at a composting facility, it's 95, 97% gate fee. If you're looking at an AWT facility, it's 95 to 97% gate fee. MRFs range, depending on the size of the MRF. The really large mega MRFs, you're talking about 100% of the revenues generated from product sales. Smaller MRFs, it may be down around 50%. So one of the key things is that the revenue risk sits with the MRF operator. It doesn't sit with the local government. This is really, really important because with the implementation of CDS, those revenue streams can be and will be significantly affected. On the opposite side, the costs for an operator, obviously the fixed and variable operating costs and their amortisation of capital, that's heavily linked to tonnage. So the number of tonnes you receive enables you to amortise those costs over a greater base. As the CDS is implemented, the thing that we can all expect is that a lot of the containers will be kept by households, will be separated out by children, will be taken to schools, P&Cs, collection points, depots. The risk from or the implications from a MRF owner point of view is that we're talking about 15 to 20% of the tonnage. So if we move to South Australian type levels, where only 12% of the CDS eligible containers remain in the recycling service, we're going to lose 80% of that material. So we're talking about somewhere between 12 to 16% reduction in tonnage. That's significant. If you're talking about a facility that's designed and priced at 100,000 tonnes or 50,000 tonnes per annum, to lose 15 to 20% of your volume, of your tonnage, is going to have a massive impact on that operation. The positive is that you're obviously going to reduce your variable operating costs, but you're also going to have a significant impact on product value. The big benefit everyone sees is everyone's done the calculations, and with 70,000 aluminium containers per tonne of aluminium, everyone knows that aluminium is going to go up sevenfold. PET is going to go up sevenfold. Polypropylene is going to go up sixfold. HDPE will go up 3.5-fold. Glass will go up sevenfold. So overall, you've got a massive increase in the value of that 15% of the containers. However, if you have 85% of that material escaping the scheme, you're back about neutral. So the big fear that the operators have is that many councils are probably thinking, this is great, we're going to have this massive windfall from the CDS scheme. I think the reality is that long term, our analysis and other operators' analysis is that this will cost the recycling sector. And this is a sector that's already under a lot of pressure. Paper prices have reduced by 50% over the last month. Power prices have gone up between 30 and 50%. Look like they're staying at those levels. And with 3 major fires in recycling plants in the last 6 weeks, some insurers are completely exiting the industry, and we can all be absolutely certain that insurance premiums are going to go up significantly. So it's really testing times. It's going to take some very, very pragmatic discussions. And one point we really want to emphasise is it's potentially a two-edged sword. The cost of recycling may actually, and I think we will find in 3 to 5 years, may actually increase with the introduction of CDS and CRS.
Just to clarify the number of the 160 million, that's a recognition of the fact that 97% at the moment is considered to go through MRFs at present. So is that when you got the number of the...
No, the 160 million was Steve's number in terms of the amount of containers in the litter stream that they're hoping to address with the CDS.
There's been discussions from memory that the EPA have said that about 97% of eligible containers currently go through household as well. So that's a very large number. They're already in that stream now and being currently recycled. So, yeah. Just to segue that, those containers are all coming then through collectors. And I think the one thing that, and I guess the purpose of today's panel also was to talk about things just a little bit differently. Because one thing that I don't think we've got to very well to discuss is collections and the impact that potentially CDS will have on collections. Probably because we don't know yet. We're all kind of guessing. We've done good maths around how many eligible containers potentially are in the yellow bin, and it's given us data. We don't know what people's behaviour habits are going to be. But there's been discussion about, collection contracts may need to change or how they are. So that's why we thought Dave Clancy, manager of Cleanaway, was a great opportunity to get him to come and talk to us a bit today about that. He's been with Cleanaway for over 25 years in Queensland and now in New South Wales. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks, Gail. And look, there's been an enormous amount of work, and the partners will acknowledge the amount of work that the EPA has put into the scheme at the moment, but it's very much around the policy and around the design of the system in terms of how to implement the scheme. The part which hasn't really come to the fore yet, because we don't know who is going to be appointed as the network coordinator, network operators and collection points, is just exactly how it's going to happen in front of the customer every day of the week. And it's really a case, we won't get knowledge of that until we end up in July, probably. And so from July onwards, will be really a case of building the plane as we're learning to fly. And that's a real scary point when we start talking about some of the numbers which are engaged in this of $700 million for the scheme value. So I just wanted to cover off a couple of points. One of them is around the collection point, is that's where the customer experience is. And the whole system will not work unless there is a system which the customer is willing to participate in. So the system will end up with zero if the container deposit scheme isn't accepted by the people and accepted as the method of redeeming the scheme. We're all confident that will happen. But we have a very condensed time frame. When I was checking on the time for when this panel was on, I had a look at the handy book, and I looked down the themes of each of the talks that have been presented over the last couple of days and what's on today, and just how much thought and experience and expertise has been put into things like product stewardship, infrastructure, circular economy, education, innovation, social enterprise, technology, litter, waste services, tendering and planning. These are all aspects that CDS is about to enter into in the next couple of weeks that have to be on the deck, so the customer, when they front up to a collection point in a couple of months' time, or a couple of weeks' time really, they're going to have a positive experience, because that first touch point that they have with their collection point will need to be a positive experience, because we want repeat business. The whole system is relied on volume, and the whole system is requiring the customer to keep coming back. So a positive customer experience is one key thing before we even start about logistics and transport and how much work is involved in that. The system has to be customer friendly. So if it's customer friendly, it needs to have, it needs to be a safe place to drop material off. So the quick answer to some of the collection points is to utilise existing infrastructure, but not necessarily all existing infrastructure is set up for a customer experience. It's set up for a business-to-business transaction. It's not a 10-year-old kid walking up to a collection point in a scrapyard or in a recycling centre. There has to be some sort of facilities incorporated in that, and that impacts on planning, impacts on traffic management, impacts on the operators to provide a safe environment for those people to come and to utilise the system. Convenience is another factor. We, unlike South Australia, we are following an existing curbside recycling system with the CDS. South Australia had the CDS well implemented before curbside collection came in. So the behavioural change and some of the societal issues we heard about yesterday were not evident in South Australia when the CDS was implemented. We're going to be faced with that in New South Wales. In terms of the collections, as I said, this is where the system will really hit the road and will really make or break the whole plan. Yes. So it's some preparations are possible, and there are lots of people working really hard on preparing for something which they may or may not get. And the seven zones, there will be no clarity on where you get the zone. So you may be appointed a zone operator in Lismore or Burke or Bega. And your economics and your planning will have to change to manage the regional impacts and manage the distances of moving material around. The distances and the challenges of moving material around, when I lay awake at night worrying about all this, is I look at the forward logistics of distributing containers of Coke and Pepsi and CUB and all those beer cans around the state, and how many trucks go on the road to take them to communities. It's almost exactly the same number of trucks that have to come back and bring them back to collection points. So reverse logistics is a key factor. But until the system coordinator and system network operators are known, we won't be able to have those discussions until they're all sorted. So it's a real challenge for us, and it's a real challenge for the industry, and I think it's a real challenge for the communities in regional areas. So I know a lot of councils do a great amount of work in, say, community drop-off centres and the likes of that, but consideration about maybe the increase in volume of traffic going through the collection points, what are the safety systems that are required at those locations, and how are we going to engage with the people to manage that change of behaviours and to encourage the number of people to come through the system so that they're using the CDS system for what it is and to reduce the litter out in the community.
Thanks, Dave. That was great. So I think Jeff's sitting here going, rocking. Yeah, got it. So I'll hand over to Cameron McKenzie. Cameron is Group Manager of Environment and Planning at the Hillshire Council in Sydney's Northwest. He's been with Council since 1998 and he's been a Group Manager since 2009. As we heard yesterday, Cameron looks after planning and environment. So he's going to give a little bit of a council perspective of what's going to be happening between now and December.
Yeah, thanks very much, Gail. Yes, I look after planning, so I understand the planning regime around this. Waste is one of my portfolios, but I also put on a hat for property for the remainder of the council who would potentially be involved with this. Ladies and gentlemen, just again, the Hills Council's on northwest Sydney. We have a good socio-economic group. So in other words, everyone's employed, everyone's educated. We've been described as Westies made good. In other words, people from the western suburbs who are doing well gravitate to the hills. It's an aspirational area, family-orientated area. Typically, both parents work. Everyone's time poor. So the reason I describe that is my local government experience might be different from other people's, but for me, I wonder when you're working hard, you're commuting, you're looking after kids, getting them to their sport, at what point do you want to make another trip to engage in this system, particularly when we've got curbside recycling, we've got a 3-bin system. Our levels of contamination in all those bins are very, very low. We don't find many bottles in the red bin, for example. We got less than 4% contamination in the yellow bin. So what is the hook to get people to engage with this? I don't think anyone would make a trip in Sydney for $2.40. We pay a lot of money in tolls to save time, so to have additional trips, it's not going to be for a carton of beer for a $2.40 return, I don't think. Obviously the collection points have got to be accessible. That will assist. Environmental benefit, difficult message to sell perhaps when people understand that their bottles are being recycled already. So there's not a great point for a price hook, I don't think. Not a great, although there's some compelling speakers earlier, hard to make the environmental pitch, I think. We don't have litter in the streets, and if we do have a couple of hotspots, you don't typically see too many containers. So in the spirit of let's make this work, I'd suggest a lot of communities are very community-minded, so perhaps the best hook is to partner with schools, sporting groups and the like, where rather than getting the money back, that's a donation to wherever you are providing your material. In terms of the regime, the state is creating a state environmental planning policy. Again, that's top-level stuff to make these machines exempt from requiring consent. So that should speed up that process, noting the December implementation date. But obviously, the operators will need the consent of the owner. Now, they may be looking at councils who have a lot of parks and reserves. There's got to be a discussion with councils. I don't think we've had that discussion yet, clearly because we don't know who the operators are. Will the council give away their land, the lease of their land? I doubt it. We'll want $1 to have a machine on there, and we'll want it serviced in a manner that it's kept clean. One issue I see is the people who go to these vending machines and take maybe the wrong types of containers, or even the cartons or bags that they have the containers in. We'd be worried that it's going to operate like clothing bins where if there's a surplus of material, it gets dumped next to the bins, looks untidy, people don't like it. And then they bring other products that the clothing bin people don't want, like furniture, furry toys and the like. So we could see a problem with the residual waste that's not suitable for the vending machines. So if we enter into contracts with people, it'll be certainly on the basis that there's regular collection and of waste left around the systems.
Thanks, Cameron.
Thank you, Kat.
Thanks. We're going to have a bit from Queensland and ACT to get an update on that, and then we'll throw to the floor for questions, because I think we all really want to know what's happening down the eastern seaboard. So I might start giving the microphones next to Michael, and he's nodding. I'll let you go first, Michael. Yeah. So Michael Trischel is the director of ACT No Waste. There's nowhere to hide now, Michael. You're here. Yeah. No Waste is an interesting body, I found, because you're kind of state and you're kind of local, so you do all of it. So Michael is the director of that and ACT. He's been in the government since... how long have you been there? Sorry, your bio's so long. I can't read it all. So anyway, I'll hand over to Michael. They hope to have it in early January, isn't it? That's your plan.
Well, I'll talk a bit about
our
plan. The gestation of CDS in the ACT is not one really highly driven by policy, and we know the Commonwealth did an exercise around cost-benefit analysis on this, which didn't stack up, which my policy manager Bruce Edgerton tells me that's one of the reasons why it wasn't sort of adopted as a sort of a project at the federal level. For the ACT, it became apparent that if New South Wales implemented a CDS, the cost-benefit analysis became a no-brainer, and we had no choice but to go. And that was kind of the policy position expressed by the government from the time that the Baird government started to discuss this prior to the New South Wales election. We had an election for the local government in the ACT in October, and there was an election commitment by ACT Labor that if they got in, that they would implement a CDS in the ACT by January 2018. And there were a few other hooks with that, and that was at the time when New South Wales were saying they were going in July. So I think perhaps from a point of view of government, an additional 6 months when we were starting from nothing probably seemed reasonable. So that presented a particular challenge for us, particularly prior to the budget cycle. So Labor got in with the Greens, formed government. Then there's obviously the process around what election commitments move forward to the next budget, 17-18. And so we go into that process seeking funding to implement the CDS. But mindful that there were a lot of things to do straight away. With a small team running both state and local government waste functions, we had to find a fairly pragmatic, low-cost, low-resource way of doing this. And the other thing at the same time, we were looking at, I suppose from a policy point of view, I guess some of the concerns around the way the product stewardship was performing across the country, and there was a review around that. So we started to think around what role CDS might play in the broader product stewardship agenda. I sort of took over responsibility for ACT's waste policy in January and started to take a much closer look at this. Our experience was essentially the local government experience around CDS, so some of the stuff that had worked, some of the stuff that hadn't. The stuff that from our point of view that worked really well was e-waste. I know there was the operational review around that. From our point of view, the tweaks the Feds made on that, including increasing the quotas, made a massive difference in framing. Apart from a period of 6 months, just prior to that review, we were getting all our e-waste taken at no cost to us through that scheme. So we took a bit of a view that CDS was potentially, what were the broader benefits around that as a platform for engagement with our community around broader recycling. So we saw the short term get it in, but what benefit did it provide as a platform for broader engagement with the community around recycling? In terms of getting it in, there was an assumption that we would host these drop-off points at our various transfer stations and recycling drop-off centres. I took the view that those facilities are already under a lot of pressure, and David talked about the customer experience, and I agree entirely. The acceptance of this scheme is more about the ease at which people can bring containers and get their money, the look and feel of the whole scheme, and I think that's really, really important. We talked about the concept of the sort of drop-off centre, and the CDS being a kind of a cornerstone to that, and then bringing other things into that which can provide an excellent sort of retail customer experience, pull that away from our big transfer stations, which are sort of more industrial and commercial in nature, and create a platform for transfer station or drop-off places that can be in shopping centres and can satisfy the needs of our planners and land developers for the kind of the look and feel that the ACT government is trying to develop for Canberra. So there are a lot of things to think about within a fairly short period of time. The other thing we were concerned about, and also with New South Wales around the cross-border issue, so we're simply a very small island of 400,000 people in the middle of the southeast of New South Wales, so what happens there affects us. So New South Wales wrote to the ACT government seeking to harmonise on this. We felt that was perfectly logical, and we started that work. So if you want to understand the ACT CDS, if you know the New South Wales CDS, the ACT will be the same. We'll operate like another zone within New South Wales. We'll use the same sort of branding. We'll have the same containers. We may well share various licensing and registration activities and things like that. The other, and particularly the branding, because the opportunity to maybe over time end up with a national harmonised scheme, I think is a really important opportunity, and also demonstrating perhaps there is capacity across the states to actually do that. I think that's important to try and find some way to demonstrate there is a way to do that, because I think that it's really difficult to do a lot of stuff around the product stewardship scheme when you're side of things when you're trying to do it on your own, and not feeling super encouraged around the commitment from the federal government at the moment in this space. So maybe this is just an early opportunity to sort of step into that space and see how well we can work together. So that's our sort of approach. We will, our proposal to our government is that we will adopt the same scheme coordinator as New South Wales. We're just simply too small to have our own scheme coordinator, and I think that it just wouldn't work. And in terms of network operator, we will most likely appoint a single network operator. David talked about the MRF side of things, and those yesterday afternoon who saw Stuart Garbutt's presentation on the MRF in Canberra and the really excellent work that's been done around that. It's very important for us that we try and minimise the disruption to our curbside system, but also minimise the disruption to that facility to ensure that it remains viable and it continues to achieve the sort of recycling outcomes that we need. So there's some broader fish to fry around that for us.
Thanks, Michael. That was great. Finally, a bit of Queensland perspective. Jeff Robson has worked at in policy and legislation roles across the Commonwealth and Queensland Government for 20 years. He's the Executive Director of Strategic Environment and Waste Policy Branch in Queensland's Department of Environment and Heritage. Prior to taking up that role in 2015, he worked in Queensland's Department of Premier and Cabinet for 8 years in economic environment policy. For Jeff Sins, he gets to sit on an industry working group with people like myself and Grant and...
I thought you were on it for your sins.
Oh, well, yeah, some days it does feel like that. But, you know, I've got to say, I do think you got, like, from where you guys are with your consultation mechanisms and the way that you've actually been listening to us and feeding back through that group, I think that you've learned, you've improved on the New South Wales model, so well done. I think we'd like to hear more about where Queensland's at and where Queensland's heading.
Thanks, Gail, and thanks for the opportunity to speak here today. As a bureaucrat, you get used to working on initiatives that aren't always popular, and often that means as a bureaucrat you're not always popular yourself. You kind of comes with the territory. I was reflecting recently with one of the stakeholders who's on our advisory group, who said to me, isn't it nice to be working on a scheme in relation to containers? Isn't it nice to be working on a scheme that's so popular for once? And we thought, wasn't that nice? So I realised this morning that my run of luck with working on a popular scheme has run out today on the panel. But, there you go. I suppose I could say I'm back in familiar territory. But that does pose a very serious question for us all. And that is, well, yes, we're aware of the complexities and concerns in implementing container deposit or container refund schemes, as we are calling it in Queensland. But it is a very popular scheme. In my experience, it is one of the more popular schemes in terms of our understanding of the widespread level of support from the general public for a scheme. And in the Queensland context, many of you may be aware that the scheme does appear to have bipartisan support in our state, and bear in mind that we have a hung parliament in our state at the moment, which is a bit unusual for us. We don't have an upper house, so the parliamentary environment for us is different compared to what we've often been used to in Queensland. So to have a scheme that enjoys bipartisan support is interesting and useful for us, and it probably does reflect the degree of public support that the scheme has. So acknowledging that, I do want to make it clear that we understand the concerns and we are endeavouring to understand as best we can the concerns that many in the resource recovery industry have with respect to the implementation of the scheme. And we are endeavouring to introduce something that will be as efficient and as effective as possible in our state. We have got a lot to thank New South Wales for leading the way. The election commitment that the Queensland Government had at the 2015 state election was to investigate a scheme. So that explains the process that we undertook and why there's a longer time frame than New South Wales, because we went through a process first of actually exploring the suitability of the scheme for Queensland. And then in July of last year, the government made a commitment to implementing the scheme. With respect to the operation of the schemes, we are working with New South Wales to do our best to make sure that what the consumer sees and experiences in the scheme will be no different across the two states. The operating system back of house is likely to be different. We're going down a different path to New South Wales in terms of governance arrangements, and we're looking at a product responsibility organisation. And in other words, we're looking at essentially placing responsibilities on the beverage industry for collection of the containers that their product goes into. And so the product organisation scheme will contain beverage industry representation. We're talking to the stakeholder group at the moment in quite some detail about the makeup of that, so that's a work in progress. And one of the discussions at the moment is the sort of targets and rules and accessibility requirements you would place upon the industry in terms of its responsibilities to actually get the material back, and also how to ensure that it is representative, that it's got coverage of the range of beverage manufacturers, and that it's a representative body in terms of the interests that would be represented through the governance arrangements on that body. And one of the things we're looking at in that respect is for the government to appoint an independent chair to the board of the Product Responsibility Organisation. So that's a little bit of a short summary of the nature of the arrangements we're undertaking in Queensland. So in summary, we want to be as consistent as possible as New South Wales for what the consumer sees, but in terms of the governance arrangements, they're likely to be different in Queensland. Just touching on some of the comments with respect to ensuring that there's a good customer experience when they return their cans and so forth. I think that's well understood, and certainly we've been very pleased in Queensland to have very strong engagement from a range of groups, whether they be beverage industry, waste industry, community groups, RVM suppliers and so forth. We have had really in-depth engagement to try and cover the field of issues and ensure that customers do indeed have a good experience when they're returning their bottles and cans. And just with respect to, again, the overall purpose of the scheme, as Anne pointed out, recycling recovery rates in Queensland may not be as good as they are in other jurisdictions, and I suspect that is one of the reasons for the popularity of the scheme in my state, is that there is a desire amongst the general public to see litter reduced first and foremost, but also to see, more of a culture of recycling introduced into our state, and I think that the public at large would see a container refund scheme as a key element to enhancing that culture. We've got a couple of challenges in Queensland. It would be remiss of any Queenslander not to mention the challenge of a remote and distributed population when we're speaking at panels like this, so that's another thing that we're working away on. And again, the stakeholder engagement has been critical to that. And I want to acknowledge the time and effort that people put in, whether it be from the Local Government Association of Queensland, whether it be from Scouts, Gale, Grant and others, who are really investing a lot of time with us so that we can get the best scheme we can operating on 1 July next year. We realise that it's a significant investment of your time. We really appreciate it, so I just want to acknowledge that.
Thanks, Jeff. I know there'll be lots of questions from the floor, so we'll get some mics. We're not an expert panel, we're just, I guess, a group of interested panel, so, don't expect us to get everything right, but we'll do our best. I know it sounds like it's doom and gloom, but we are a very good sector at getting our act together, and once we know things and solving problems, so it's not that scary. I see just one comment, and I'll ask maybe somebody to answer. I see a real opportunity in increasing recovery rates through commercial and industrial sector, because I think that the recycling rates in those areas are really poor. Like you see product come out of the back of those trucks and you think they're already baled, the compaction level is so high. So for me, I think there's a great opportunity with CDS to actually rethink how we service C&I buildings to make sure we get better recovery rate. That's an untapped field that we haven't quite got to, and I don't think we quite know how we're going to handle that through MRFs yet, but apparently it can be done. So, any thoughts on that? David or Clancy, it's yours. You have to hand over the mic now, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks, Gail. There's absolutely a real opportunity to spread this through just outside the community consumer group to commercial industrial buildings and major places, so universities, major events. There is a lot of material that gets thrown out and put in landfill when it should be recovered because of recycling commodity there, so I totally agree. It's a great opportunity.
I think that'll help hit targets, to be fair. All right, so any questions from the floor? I'm sure there's lots. Oh, yeah, we've got one over there. Sorry. Can you introduce yourself too, please?
Justin Bonzi from the grassroots organisation Responsible Runners. We've been working very hard to collect data to get this across the line, so I congratulate all states who have committed to this so far. It's really a major milestone. I had a couple of questions. One, seeing as all other states have now committed and are working hard to make this process a reality, what is it going to take to get Victoria and Tasmania across the line? And two, what is the likelihood that this would then, once all states are on board, assuming it's a question of when, not if, Victoria and Tasmania join the crowd, what is the likelihood that it would then become a federal system rather than a state-based system? Thanks.
I don't know, Jeff, that might be yours. It sounds like a legal question. I think the answer to the first one is politics, and it's very unlikely, we're told, that with the current Victorian government that they will enter into a CDS scheme, but that might change. But at the moment, this government isn't interested in doing it, so that's the response for the government issue. But in relation to, I guess, a referral into a federal scheme, Jeff?
Yeah, I've had this question about a federal scheme put to me before, and there's no, it's a good question. There's no set answer. Basically, at the moment, New South Wales, Queensland, ACT, we're all very focused on establishing our own schemes, but we are also very aware of the question that you raised. What is the prospect for a federal or a national scheme? I think that's something that we will naturally start to discuss more once our schemes are embedded. So it's a case of watch this space. I can't speak for Victoria and Tasmania, obviously, so thanks, Gail, for answering that part of the question. And I'm sure, Victorian and Tasmanian public servants don't really want a Queenslander sort of commenting on their business, so I'll refrain, because Queenslanders tend not to like the reverse happening, obviously. But yes, it's a very good question. It'll be a natural conversation for the states with the scheme to start having once we're confident our own schemes are bedded down.
Can I just ask Jeff, yourself and Michael, given that part of the reason of having consistent schemes, will you be able to, if you live in Tweed Heads and go to Coolangatta, can you take your containers with you and redeem them in Queensland under your scheme? And similarly,
not before 1 July, no.
No, not for 1 July.
Sorry, what's that?
So will you be able to buy your product in New South Wales and deposit it and get the refund in Queensland?
Oh, look, we are anticipating there will be a degree of cross-border movement, and as I say, we are wanting the scheme to be the same sort of scheme that the consumer faces, whether they're experiencing it in New South Wales, Queensland, and to a certain extent at least South Australia, because there is a number of areas where New South Wales and Queensland have lined up with South Australia, albeit some of the customer interactions will be different with the technology and so forth. So the schemes will be separate schemes, but given that things like refund marking and the actual eligible containers themselves will be consistent, I think that means there will be some cross-border flows, and that's something that we continue to talk to New South Wales about, continue to talk to the players involved in the scheme about. I think with that consistency of labelling, product and so forth, we can manage that as best we can.
Yeah. Okay, next question. Oh, come on. Oh, Mike, I wasn't intentionally avoiding you. Sorry. Okay, Mike.
Thank you. One for David. David, the New South Wales government recognises that it's very difficult for councils and MRF operators to come to a commercial agreement while we don't know what percentage of containers remain in the yellow top bins. As Anne has said, there's differences everywhere. We've got 12 months between the commencement of the scheme and the date at which the councils have to write to the state government and say, the deal I have arrived at with the MRF operator is, inverted commas, fair. It seems to me very difficult for the parties to come to an agreement even in that 12 months, because the scheme has to settle out and we need to know how much Scouts and et cetera, are going to take up those containers out of the bins. So even after 12 months, we won't have a stable framework to commercially agree those transfers of money. How do you see that resolving itself in the timeframes?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. I think the reality is it's going to be a dynamic mechanism. Probably the only example that comes to mind is similar to, we saw the presentation earlier on carbon credits. There are a number of contracts nowadays that are let, and the right and the privilege to the credits remains with the local authority. The obligation is on the operator to secure and provide the information to verify those credits. You can see in the new MRF contracts that that's probably the path that local government will go down. The interesting period is this transition period for existing contracts. And it was, it's one of the points Dave Clancy and I were discussing yesterday. It's even harder because a lot of the time you're going to have three parties, because there are a lot of contracts that are collection and process. So the collector has the legal relationship with the local authority, and then the collector has a legal relationship with the processor. There is no contractual nexus between the local authority and the operator. So there's actually no method, there's no basis for payment to be transferred from the MRF operator back to the local authority. So, there are any number of different permutations that are going to need to be solved. And I think the most important thing is that it needs to be very, very pragmatic. And I think the thing that's going to be required from our industry is a willingness for a high level of transparency, because it's going to keep changing. The redemption levels are probably going to start low and they're going to ramp up over time. And the point that I was trying to make earlier was, you can see, especially for the very large MRFs, there's a point where it goes negative, where it will actually increase the cost of recycling. And I think, so there'll be windfalls at the start, but there may well be long-term cost consequences, especially for contracts that are just starting or are only within the first couple of years.
Cameron wants to add to that, David.
Also, I'd just like to say that my understanding is that the New South Wales EPA is going to provide negotiators to local government to assist them in those discussions with the MRFs. And I think that sort of sets up for a confrontation rather than a negotiation. I would have thought it would have been better for the EPA to provide maybe moderators that are independent and that are bringing the parties together for an agreement rather than one against the other. That's just my personal opinion. Yep.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you. Our council recently went through a tender process for all our for collection and processing and the like disposal, including recyclables. The legislation was a moving target. We all acknowledged that. We had pre-tender meetings, disclosed that, of course, and I seem to recall having a few questions from one of the potential tenderers, Gail, at the time. We are in the position we get a rebate for products, so the 18% possible reduction in tonnage, we get a rebate per tonne, so that's potentially a hit on the council. But the contract have dispute resolution clauses, change in law. We will go through a process. We don't see it as being an adversarial process, and transparently we'll come to a resolution that both parties deem to be fair. So I'm optimistic we'll resolve those issues.
That's good. There's a question over at the side.
It was good to hear about ACT looking at introducing retail collection points, and that addresses some of the safety issues in the existing transfer stations, but about making it a lot more local and making it a lot more easy for people, whether small business, consumers, to participate in take back. I mean, it's also a great opportunity to take back other products as well in a clean and more retail environment. I'm also interested from the waste company's perspective to understand how are they going to deal with the logistics, given there are, the diversity of collection points and, the old sort of focusing in 1 or 2, 3 key points and large trucks. I mean, there's an opportunity to start working with smaller companies, courier companies, moving product around. It's a real opportunity to try and maybe be a bit more creative about how we move the product, how we use existing transport systems, and how we protect the product so we can recover more materials and increase the value. So maybe a question for the waste companies. David?
Yeah, thank you. And look, it's, as I said, there is a lot of work being done by lots of people who are participating in this scheme, and it's really opened up a lot of thought processes around doing things differently. It's I have a fundamental view that it's one solution won't suit every location, and it won't be the same logistics solution for each one. So in terms of the retail solution, there are a number of opportunities for RVMs to appear in retail solution that provides a very convenient and easy access experience for their customers. And I mentioned reverse logistics, which is not something that the waste industry has been involved in typically in the past. So dealing with those producers of materials who bring trucks out and returning them. So we also have a number of different, sorry, we can't talk about the tender, so I'm sort of juggling around a bit, but there is a number of options that each of the tenderers are looking at, which is very different to the way we deal with things today, and it's by absolute necessity. You know, there is a volume issue, there's a frequency of collections, and there are challenges on each of those sites. So the dilemma we have that I mentioned before is just that compressed time frame to really give it a real innovative solution and work through a number of those issues in that list of considerations I mentioned before, and do that in a condensed time frame. So I think we will have potentially a suboptimal system to start with in the first period of time, and Mike mentioned a 12-month transition period. I think what it appears in 12 months after the implementation will probably be different to the first day it opened. So we talk about flexibility and ability to adapt, and that's what will be absolutely key across all sectors and participants in this.
I think the fantastic thing, and people maybe didn't hear the first part of your comment, was that 12 months from now, or not even that, January, we're going to have 400 new sites throughout New South Wales that potentially have got resource recovery capacities well and above what we have now. So, I think Steve said yesterday to hit 209 CRCs in New South Wales. Well, lo and behold, in 12 months' time, we'll have 600 potentially. So rather than maybe putting product in a yellow bin and affecting a curbside system, there's an opportunity to look at product stewardship and resource recovery through those licensed sites that we just don't currently have. So it is a great injection of capital and processes and in resource recovery in New South Wales for other things too. Yeah, Ron?
Ron Weinberg, MRA Consulting. A question to David Singh. You mentioned that there'd be a possible increase in costs resulting from the introduction of CDS. Would that be exacerbated by the fact that removing containers from the yellow bin will increase the effective contamination in the yellow bin, increasing the cost of processing that? So is that going to have an overall impact? Does that apply to most MRFs, some MRFs, whatever?
Yeah, so not from first-hand experience, but from other MRF operators that are part of ACOR, the experience is that you create bin real estate. So you're creating space within a bin, and human tendency is if you've got a smaller red top bin and it's full, you then put the material in the other available space. So there is a concern about how that real estate may be used or abused. And then the other issue, and this is critical, it's a significant issue. There was a summit held a couple of weeks ago on glass, is that the amount of contamination in the glass will now increase. So whilst there'll be less glass in the bin, or in the finer fraction of the material, which is usually screened out in a MRF, there will be more contamination. So you've got a more difficult equation to get that glass to a standard where it can either be recycled or reused in some fashion. So they're sort of some pretty critical issues that no one really knows exactly what the equation is going to, what we're going to be dealing with.
And just to expand on the glass issue further, we know at the moment that with the yellow bins in New South Wales as it is, and Anne did a presentation to WACRA on this, there is an EPA working group. Not every MRF in New South Wales currently has a contract for its MRF glass. So there's a real chance that MRF glass will not be required at all going forward. It will be an unintended consequence of the scheme because the quality of the glass has got through the collection points, and you see it in Adelaide when you drive around, you've got these beautiful pristine bottles on the back of trucks. You go, how do you get those? The OI and those who turn food grade glass back into food grade will just take all the collection point glass, and suddenly MRF glass will not have a marketplace for food grade. Potentially alternative markets can be found, but in the short term when we already know we've got one provider with 17 warehouses somewhere of glass, we've got a real issue for what's going to happen with glass in yellow bins going forward. So it's a problem for the industry with EPA to solve. Another question? You're all so quiet. Yeah, we've got one down the front. We might make this the last question then. We'll just wrap up.
Yeah, my name's James Turnell. I'm the Executive Officer for the Northern Inland Regional Waste Group at Waste Manager at Armidale Regional Council. And just within our region, which is the green one up on the top there, just on the previous, when you're on your slide, there's such a vast difference just within our region as to what councils may be able to provide close to their existing facilities, right through to the fact that we've got that cross-border area up there. And just in terms of the customer experience as well, that seems to be something that some of the councils are concerned that if it's not a good experience, it may actually reflect back on the local government and just dealing with some of those things. So we're very positive about the scheme, but we can see that there is variation there, and that was really just a comment.
Thank you. Might just wrap up by asking the panel what they think this scheme will look like and what success looks like in 12 months' time. Jeff, you get the extra 6 months. So what was success looks like for you in Queensland?
Yes, so our scheme, as I said, starts on 1 July 2018. So I think success for us will be a scheme that is operating effectively to see those collection rates growing, but also, for me, a scheme that sees broad participation, whether it's local governments, community groups, schools, RBMs, etc. That's what we want to see, is a scheme with lots of people collecting their refunds and lots of groups involved in collecting the material, handing out the refunds, or indeed charities getting the refunds themselves. So, yeah, that's what I'm hoping to see.
David?
So I guess what we're hoping to see is that there's a very successful launch to the scheme. A bad launch in New South Wales could have ramifications for the rest of the country, and that there is a scheme in which people have a lot of confidence in, that the money is being used responsibly. Personally, I'd really love to see that there's a very big social enterprise interaction with the scheme, that it's not just a corporate fest, and that it becomes a means of funding a lot of social enterprises.
Great. Anne?
I guess a very engaged community, a very engaged council, reduction in litter, which is the absolute objective of the program, and an increase in resource recovery, which is the secondary objective of the program.
Everything that they said.
I think success in 12 months for me will be accessible machines and strong link to community sporting groups and some community interest along those lines.
I think it'd be my kids just asking me, what am I doing with that bottle, and can they take it down the street? Like if they're pushing me to say, let's get this 10 cent back, well then I think we've all done a really good job.
Yeah. Thank you. I think what you've heard today is we're all just really keen to get on with it, know what we're dealing with and get started, because we recognise what a great opportunity this is for the industry and for the community. So thank you everyone for coming today and joining in, and we hope that we shared some insights and education about where we're at and where we're going. Thank you.